If it makes too much sense, I'm bored. I'm out. I got to project imagination. So, 2008 or 9 or something, Bad Moon Rising, the third book in Jonathan Maberry's first published books. The third book in the Pine Deep trilogy comes out, and meanwhile, teenage me is playing Gears of War 2 badly online, wasting time, never satisfied. And I should have been reading this. I wish I read this because this might be the greatest horror novel series I've ever read, and it's oh, I hate myself right now that I can't find the words to describe how awesome this is. This is a special type of awesome. This is like before the whole internet generation and adulterated infection of the world, pussified everything and cut off everybody's balls. This is like 1970s, like, Vietnam tonal rat grunt sort of spirit vibes. This is something that, like, I look to the past generations, the spiritual successor, meta infused embodiment product of just grit, and it has this very American gritty Heartland like feel that's just very. It's just you've seen the spirit this in a new enough decade, which I suppose was last decade. Actually, it was the decade before last. So I'm kind of out of touch, but it feels new to me. I guess I'm getting old. But basically, it has clear inspirations if you know about anything about the long history of all sorts of horror and adventure books that have a sort of machismo that is scarily in my time now being diversified and forgotten and readapted into oblivion with all the perverted false ideological nonsense. But I mean, this story will put hair on your chest. I mean, I will say that there's a female alive that really genuinely enjoys this story. I'm going to ask her to marry me because I don't think it exists, because mostly this is a very guy-centric novel. It is, I could talk about this all day. I'm going to just kind of rephrase the shitty reviews I made a year ago when I read the first two books and try to just clump all the books together. I don't think there'll be any major spoilers in the first two books, and I'm not going to spoil this book. So I'm not going to talk too heavily about the plot. I'm just going to make a lot of generalizations about why I think this is one of the greatest horror novel trilogies ever written. It comes down to the believability of moment by moment action. The monsters featured are not completely believable, but there's enough suspension of disbelief because it just takes itself seriously enough while still being fun and kind of admittedly, I don't want to say nonsensical, because there's consistency in a lot of his, for lack of a better word, magic systems that govern the functionings of the monsters, but most of it is not really explained. It's hokey comic book stuff, but the delivery is what really sells it. And good dialogue, good prose, the depth of the lore of this fictional town, Pine Deep, and all of its haunted history and all the meta symbolism involved with the darkness of America's past. You've got themes of PTSD, past buried racism, old skeletons in the closet, so to say, resurfacing, and themes of destiny. You've got all this. I didn't know that Jonathan Maberry was a folklorist and had a lifelong fascination with occult phenomenon, with going back to pre-America European roots and legends that are seen like theories and actual beliefs, that it almost gets religious by the end of the novel, and that ties in with themes of good and evil and so many other things. This book has great sympathetic heroic characters that are super likable, funny, memorable. The chemistry between characters, relationships, you keep track of everything, because when you're emotionally invested as much as this book, you really start to care. And so it's got everything. It's got really great moments of deadpan humor. It's almost unbelievable, just the weird synchronicity I feel to this series, and how much it makes my inner child so gleefully happy. It's like a fever dream of mixing just pure badass action with a lot of machismo, great gun violence, and putting you facing your fears in a way that feels like secondhand empowering. And although it's got werewolves and vampires in it, it's so visually powerful. It just comes alive and it makes everything believable in a way that it really, you start to care about the characters so much, they come alive more and more as time goes on. It never feels like you're reading a story. So it has this really immersive quality that sells it, making it one of the most powerful works of imagination, regardless of genre. Comparing it to just all books in general, not just horror novels, it's so much more than a horror novel. It's just one of the most fun, most entertaining fictions that I've ever read. Loved the setting, loved the characters. The type of fear that Mayberry's really best at is a really, I call it mortal fear, like very gritty, down to earth fear. There's disgust. He's good at disgust, but also this fear of actually feeling like secondhand pain, like you get wounded and you don't know how badly you're wounded and you're afraid to look. Small moments of body horror, stuff that really makes you slow down time, almost like you're reconfronting some sort of traumatic memory. And it's literally hard to read. There's moments of the book where I feel like, because the trials that these characters are undergoing, characters die in terrible ways, like characters you like things don't like go unexpectedly, they don't go to plan. The suspense is real in this book, and it also has it's very emotionally draining on you as time goes on. So it has it has epic good versus evil. It has suspense. It's not exactly at a thriller pace, but when moments of action explode, you'll lose 100 pages in the blink of an eye, because it's just that stimulating and that compelling to see what happens next, to see who survives and that sort of thing. So um, but I say for some people it might be slightly overwritten because there's so many details. So it might, you could say it was slightly indulgent, but I don't. I wouldn't. I don't. I'm the type of reader who has the patience to enjoy that type of thing because it makes a better payoff. Like I like reading books by Tad Williams, and I like the intellectual stretching of my mind while being tasked with having to consume so many details that make more visual imagination of the setting come to life. So this is actually a very smart horror novel with a very trope laden premise of, like, elements of fantasy we've seen a billion times in a million fictions, but it still works as something that you will probably, if you give it the time, remember for the rest of your life. Like, these characters are just that cool, likable, and realistic enough. Um, I don't. Was there something else? There's going to be other things I'm going to forget to say in my review. I'm going to forget. I'm going to look back and wish I had said later. But this has got to be one of the most satisfying reads. Now, word of caution: it is the whole point of this book is it toughens you in a way where it takes you to places you don't really want to go, and but it never borders on the sadistic or something that really feels like it's coming from hell or from another world. Like, it's just commercial enough to be satisfying to people that still have souls. By that I mean the book has a lot of heart, and by the end of it, ironically, as much as I don't want to give anything away here, I sort of wish. Let me put it this way: um, it was very intense and very disturbing in many areas, but it could have been a lot more disturbing. I should say, and so, and I feel like Mayberry can go to places, but and maybe he does in his other books. But I am definitely by this point I'm excited to see other series he's worked on. So this is the third book I've finished by this guy. He's written so many books and comics. He's wrote TV shows. Like, it's just Jonathan Maberry is just a treasure of great, pulpy, suspenseful, adventure, character-driven stories that have great atmosphere, great action, and it's tried and true tropes that you've seen before. But I suppose, something I forgot to say. I want to compare this to Salem's Lot. What was my favorite vampire novel before this? This has replaced Salem's Lot as being a sort of modern, slightly more new, modernized. Like, guaranteed, I think Salem's Lot was written in the '70s, and this was in the 2000s. So this book trilogy is much does vampires better, and in many ways more true to um, his collective studies of the folklore. and that sort of thing, and he plays around with it, but he really sells it in a way that it makes the action immersive and believable, and it really has the feeling of being there, of feeling dangerous. And but these books are intentionally exploitative, like almost transcendent of like forcing you into situations that it might actually like, and the way that the Last of Us video games made me rethink my perception of violence in a very unexpectedly intellectual way. You wouldn't think, because violent video games typically associated with just being entertainment, but not some sort of weird juxtaposition that makes you intellectualize things. This made me also feel sort of spiritually drained, and that was kind of, I wonder how much of that was intentional of this author, and how much of it was him potentially being a creep and enjoying that sort of thing, because to him it's all, anything under the sun in fiction is has no moral consequence. I don't know what goes on in his heart and mind, but having listened to a few interviews of the guy, he does seem like if he is doing such a thing, he's not aware of it one way or the other. Like there's not doesn't seem to be a lot of moral depth or analysis or meaning to a lot of the suffering and loss that takes place. And maybe some of the things these people survive are not the most realistically rendered in the aftermath of those that happen to survive certain things. And so I don't know, but the bottom line is, it's just really, really, really freaking entertaining, and it's kind of comforting to see. Like, it scratched that itch of your inner child that used to believe in magic and folklore and monsters, and was kind of titillated by the idea of such evil, chaotic, supernatural elements perhaps being scientifically, realistically credible. So I guess you could almost say there's the slightest like tone, not really literally aspects of science fiction, but the tone or the feeling of science fiction in the delivery of these monsters and their different qualities and behaviors. And that is a really powerful work of imagination. Only some authors are capable of pulling off, and he really does it. So I'd say Salem's Lot was a book that took vampires and made it like more modernized for the 20th century and more serious, and brought that imagination back to life in vampire folklore. And I would say this is the best trilogy that I know of that does a similar thing in the 21st century, and then takes some extra liberties and provides original elements on top of that. I'm not saying it was, I don't know if it was inspired by Salem's Lot. It just had a very similar feeling to me. Anybody who says there's too many similarities to that and other works of Stephen King is probably just being very deliberately pessimistic for the sake of being able to sound like a know-it-all, or just not appreciative of the fact that this book is more than original enough to make up for similarities. I'd say maybe inspired by, because it did feel like just so packed with heart and authenticity, and clearly coming from a place of passion and inspiration, that ultimately it was just a fantastic adventure altogether. One that's really actually creepy, actually more horrifying than scared. There's a difference between being horrified and being scared. This book had a very emotionally draining effect on me, where I felt this genuine sense of unease creep up on me by the end of the book, because the sheer amounts of violence escalate throughout this book. That really does take me by surprise, and is much darker than the first two books. And more than that, I don't want to say, because I want to leave it as a surprise. It is willfully self-aware in its intentional exploitation and indulgence of this, like, typical, it's like a summer blockbuster sort of spirit. It demands to be treated with a huge budget and become films at some point that I'd only trust like hardcore directors to make, like, that also have a passion for good versus evil in a grounded, serious narrative setting. Like, I can't think of examples off the top of my head, but I don't want anybody to get the rights to adapt this into film or a good TV miniseries or some such, because if they do it wrong, if it's anything less than the Mike Flanagan level quality and treatment, with, and actually feels like the visions this book elicited in my mind, I'll be very, very disappointed. One of the reasons why I don't want The Dark Tower to be adapted, even though Mike Flanagan currently having the rights, is one of the few people I'd actually trust. So anyway, it's 10 out of 10. That's more than you ever wanted to know about Jonathan Maberry's Batman Rising.